Have you ever experienced that moment in jiu-jitsu when your body just fails on you? That overwhelming wave of exhaustion that washes over you during a roll or a competition match? Let me paint a picture that we're all familiar with. You're in the middle of an intense roll. Your opponent is pressuring your guard and you're trying to desperately recover position. But your muscles feel like concrete, your lungs are burning. That voice in your head starts saying, I have nothing left. And just like that, your guard gets passed and now you're trapped under crushing pressure and side control. It's your performance collapsing under critical moments. Many jiu-jitsu practitioners fall into this dangerous trap. They believe that simply showing up to class, getting some extra rounds in, and occasionally staying late after class is enough to build the conditioning needed for jiu-jitsu competition. But here's the truth. Jiu-jitsu training alone isn't enough to develop the specific cardio needed for high-intensity competition. And here's the number one reason why. Competition intensity is near impossible to replicate within jiu-jitsu training. The frustration comes when you're putting in all the training time, but still gassing out when it matters most. You might be wondering, I train all the time. Why is my cardio failing me? Why is my cardio failing me when I need it the most? The good news, the solution isn't necessarily more training, it's smarter training. And I'll break down exactly how to structure your training to build competition-specific jiu-jitsu cardio that won't abandon you when you need it most. First, check the first link in the description. There's a jiu-jitsu strength conditioning blueprint that will run through absolutely everything you need to have the greatest strength and conditioning training programs built by yourself. But first, let's touch on technical training. Now, this video is going to be slightly different to maybe the other ones that you've watched on YouTube about jiu-jitsu conditioning. But we're going to start with the technical training aspect because we cannot overlook this within our conditioning preparation. And competition style rounds have become a staple in jiu-jitsu training, especially as tournament season approaches. Now, I've got some notes on my computer as always. Here's just a quick rundown of the pros and cons of using, say, a competition round approach to jiu-jitsu conditioning. Well, first, you have to start on your feet. We spend so much time starting sitting or drilling specific positions on the ground that navigating the wrestling component is often neglected. Honestly, usually one of the most tiring aspects of actual jiu-jitsu competition. You get to go through and execute your game plan if you have one, so you become more comfortable with imposing your will, and you get a feel for the match length. If you're doing 10-minute rounds, because you have 10-minute match coming up for your jiu-jitsu tournament, you learn to manage your energy across that time frame and what it feels like at different stages throughout that time frame. Now, there are inherent drawbacks with just using a competition round approach. First one is you usually sit in your comfort zone. You go into positions you know and are familiar with. For example, maybe you're more dominant on top, so you're always trying to get into a top position and all your rounds end up there. Whereas in an actual competition, you may end up being on your back and you're gonna have to fight your way out. We often stick to what works, which means you're more efficient, which means you limit the cardiovascular neural demands of the role. Further, you're usually training with familiar training partners, and we know they're not gonna do anything stupid to hurt us. So the intensity already has changed compared to competition. Further, we know our opponent's game, our opponent knows our game. It becomes a little more difficult to get into different scenarios and positions. And finally, you can gain a false confidence from doing more competition style rounds. You think if you did 5 10-minute rounds and you feel good that you're ready, but again, the intensity isn't matched. We can modify competition rounds to include more positional sparring. So instead of doing 10 minutes of just free rolling, it could be 5 to 10 minutes from certain positions. This way you're able to work on your specific problems, scenarios, work up from positions, making the rounds more intense. But if your gym uses a game-based approach, or you're doing a lot of the stuff already, you're likely getting a lot of this important positional work in anyway. It's just a matter of finding training partners that are willing to go 100% to give you a taste of competition intensity. Now, this is how you can modify technical training, but this isn't the number one method to build jiu-jitsu conditioning, which this whole video is about. And look, I get the push towards specificity, and you should be spending as much time on the mats as possible to become more technically proficient and solve as many puzzles as possible that you might encounter on competition day. But physiology is physiology. Yes, jiu-jitsu performance and conditioning is underpinned by technical and tactical skills, as all sports are, but it's also underpinned by physiological qualities. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to target and maximize certain qualities that can enhance your grappling cardio. Further, as you get better, you become more efficient, which makes reaching intensity during rounds more difficult. Very crude and easy example, you're a white and blue belt and you go against your black belt instructor, they barely break a sweat while they're rolling with you. And then depending on what you're trying to do, you can feel gassed. Now, if we go into 1 particular study on Jiu-Jitsu. Now, again, this is just a snapshot in time with this particular cohort. So we're not going to say this is what always happens, but it tends to align with the idea that you cannot just do Jiu-Jitsu to have better Jiu-Jitsu conditioning. So they highlighted where 12 active competitive blue to brown belts performed a VO2 max test and were monitored during 5 rounds of sparring. And they found that sparring was likely not intense enough to elicit improvements in VO2 max. And yes, while this is a snapshot in time and a small cohort, the point stands. You need off-mat conditioning. And the number one method, in my opinion, is sprint interval training. Now, I've talked about this at length all over the channel, and even most recently in my MMA conditioning video. Even if you're not an MMA fighter, it's still worth watching because I go into a lot of detail in there about sprint intervals and why other approaches may not be what you need. There's main reasons why this should be your top Jiu-Jitsu conditioning method. Number one, you will never, and I mean never, replicate the intensity sprint intervals provide on the mats. No sharp tank, no scrambles or competition rounds will reach the intensity you can get to by doing sprints on, say, an air bike. And I'm telling you that from experience and from many of the athletes that do these sprint intervals. Second one, the intensity is what drives fast, time-efficient conditioning adaptations required for elite jiu-jitsu cardio. Thirdly, this intensity biases peripheral adaptations, improve mitochondrial function and content faster than low-intensity modalities. It takes you 5 to 10 minutes. And if you're training jiu-jitsu 5+ times a week, you don't have time for 30+ minute conditioning sessions. And finally, the fifth point, the desaturation and resaturation of muscle oxygen during sprint intervals is likely similar to what we experience through the tensing and isometric actions when grappling. And to expand on that last point, because it's going to sound confusing, this study is a really good one on sport climbers. So just think rock climbing generally. They show a rapid oxygen desaturation during static holds and a resaturation at rest. While we don't have grappling data yet, I'd guesstimate it's very similar in grapplers. Tie this in with skeletal muscle oxygenation during a 1K kayak time trial being shown to be a better predictive performance than VO2 max, and you have more than a few reasons to take a sprint interval approach. Then we can go into an excellent paper by Sindre Molman. They found that sprint interval training was 2.3 times more efficient than high intensity training and 3.9 times more efficient than endurance training for increasing mitochondrial content. It was also 2.9 times more efficient than high intensity training and 4.9 times more efficient than endurance training for improving VO2 max per hour trained. So how do we perform effective sprint intervals based on your individual athletic profile? We teach you this nuance in our conditioning mentorship with Dr. Andrew Usher. So check the link in the comments to get on the waitlist for the next cohort starting in June. First one sold out before the deadline, so make sure you're on that list because that list will get first dibs. But I'm going to give you the quick and dirty so you can implement this today. You're going to do 2 to 3 times a week of sprint intervals done on a bike. An air bike if possible, because I think in my experience that gives the better intensity because it's more full body. Spin bike if you don't have an air bike with moderate resistance. So you should feel like you're working, it shouldn't spin too quickly. Hill sprints or 10-meter shuttle sprints if no equipment. You cannot use kettlebell swings, push-ups, and other random circuits. These are your options for this. You're going to perform these sprint intervals directly after hard jiu-jitsu sessions. Don't perform these directly before any jiu-jitsu session. It should be after. If you have evening jiu-jitsu, you can also do the sprints in the morning. You can also do them directly after your strength training sessions. Remember, these only take 5 to 10 minutes, so they can be moved around as needed. For the sprints themselves, you're looking at a 1-to-1 to 1-to-4 work to rest, typically. Because we're typically pushing improvement and recovery between these sprints first, we're going to look at shorter rest periods instead of the longer ones. So here's a 4-week example. You can literally start running right now. Week 1 and 2, you're going to do 6 sets of 10 seconds on, 15 seconds off. Weeks 3 and 4, you're going to shift to 6 sets of 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off. These need to be all out ball busting intervals. If you're doing these 10 seconds on, 10 seconds off, you get to the end, you're like, oh, that was kind of hard. Or even that was really hard. It's still not hard enough. You did not go hard enough. You have to literally send every interval like it's your last interval. You should be finishing these intervals lying on the floor. That's very important. If you're not doing that, you're not doing them right and it's not worth it. You have to take yourself to deep dark places and you have to become friends with it. That's the only way you're going to get the most out of these intervals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to link you to this video here. Yes, it is for MMA, but the principles remain the same across all combat sports. It'll go into even more detail on why you should potentially be using a sprint interval approach over high intensity interval training and zone 2. Now there is a place for those other modalities as well, but as far as a time efficient conditioning modality, sprint intervals take the cake by far.